A woman I had never seen before sat in the second row at my mother's funeral. Not the back, not the side where strangers sometimes sit when they knew someone distantly. The second row, 3 seats from the aisle. She was in her 60s, well-dressed, with the kind of posture that suggests a person who has spent a long time preparing for difficult rooms. She held a small, folded program in both hands, and she did not look at anything. Not at the flowers, not at the casket, not at the photographs the funeral home had arranged along the left wall. My mother at 40, at 50, at the birthday dinner where she wore the blue dress I had bought her. She stared at the middle distance, and she was very still. My name is Helen. My mother died at 71 from pancreatic cancer, which is the kind of cancer that gives you almost no time. We had 4 months from diagnosis to the morning I was sitting in a hospital chair when she stopped breathing. 4 months is enough time to say things, which I did. It is not enough time to ask everything, which I did not. I was standing at the receiving line after the service when the woman approached me. She said, "You must be Helen." I said, "I am. Thank you for coming. How did you know my mother?" She looked at me for a moment. She said, "My name is Margaret. Frances was my mother, too." Frances was my mother's name. I stood in the receiving line at my mother's funeral, and I looked at a woman who was 12 years older than me, and who had just told me we had the same mother. Behind me, people were waiting to offer condolences. My husband was 3 feet away. My daughter was talking to my mother's neighbor near the door. I said, "I'm sorry?" She said, "I know this isn't the right moment. There is no right moment for this. But I've been trying to find you for 20 years, and I didn't know if you'd be here, and I didn't know if I'd be able to come, and I—" She stopped. She pressed the program in her hands flat against itself. "I am so sorry about your mother. She was my mother, too. I can prove it if you need me to." I looked at her face. My mother's eyes were dark brown. Mine are brown. This woman's eyes were exactly the same shade. I said, "Excuse me for a moment." I walked to the side of the room. I stood next to a spray of white lilies, and I breathed for approximately 90 seconds. Then I walked back to the receiving line, and I finished the condolences, and I shook hands, and I said thank you, and I meant it, mechanically, for another 40 minutes. Margaret sat in the corner and waited. My mother was born in 1942 in Savannah, Georgia. She met my father in her late 20s, married him shortly after, had me at 30. She lived in the same house in suburban Atlanta from 1983 until her death. She taught 4th grade for 31 years. She made the same pound cake every Christmas. She called me every Sunday at 10 in the morning and talked for exactly 45 minutes. This is what I knew. What I did not know, what Margaret told me over 2 hours in a hotel bar 3 blocks from the funeral home, while my husband sat with me and said almost nothing and occasionally squeezed my hand, is this. My mother had a first life, before Atlanta, before my father, before me. She had married at 16, young, too young. She was barely 15 when she met him and 16 at the altar, a man named Robert Callahan in Savannah. She had 2 children with him, Margaret, born in 1958, a boy named Thomas, born in 1961. She had lived in a house on Forsyth Street with Robert and the children until 1967, when Margaret was 9 and Thomas was 6. In 1967, my mother got into a car and drove away and did not come back. She was 25 years old. She drove to Atlanta. She rebuilt. She became Frances Morton instead of Frances Callahan. She met my father not long after. She had been gone from Savannah for 2 years. She had left behind a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and a husband who, Margaret told me, spent 4 years trying to find her. He never did. Robert Callahan died in 1989. He never knew where his wife had gone. I sat in the hotel bar and I thought about the pound cake. The pound cake she made every Christmas. The recipe she said was her grandmother's, which she had written on a yellowed index card in a handwriting I could not entirely read, and which she kept in the tin box in the kitchen where she also kept the good scissors. Every year, Christmas morning, the pound cake. Every year, she said, grandmother's recipe. Every year I ate it and felt the particular warmth of something inherited. Whose grandmother? I did not ask this question out loud. I filed it somewhere that I would have to go back to. Margaret was watching me. She said, I need you to understand that I'm not here to upset anything. I don't want anything from you. I came to the funeral because she was my mother, and she was dying, and I have been trying for 20 years to find a way to reach her, and I never could, and now she's gone, and... She stopped. She said more quietly, I just wanted to see where she ended up. I said, how did you find me? She said, obituary, her full name, Atlanta. It was her, I knew immediately. I have a photograph of her from 1965 when she was 23. The woman in the obituary photo was the same person. I said, why didn't you reach out before she died? Margaret was quiet for a moment. She said, I found her name 11 years ago. I had a private investigator. He found Frances Morton in Atlanta, 4th grade teacher, retired. I drove to Atlanta. I sat outside the school where she'd worked. She paused. I drove past her house. I said, did you ever contact her? She said, I wrote her a letter. I sent it to her house. I never heard back. I sat with this. My mother had received that letter. My mother had read it and had not responded, and had never said a word to me, and had continued making pound cake on Christmas morning, and calling me on Sunday at 10 and talking for exactly 45 minutes. I said, did you know about me before the obituary? She said, no. I knew she had remarried. I knew she had a life. I didn't know the details. I said, what was she like before? Margaret looked at me for a long time. Then she said, she was very young. She was beautiful, and she was funny, and she was restless in a way that I didn't understand until I was older. Our house was small, and our father was not an easy man. Not violent, I want to be clear. He was never violent, but difficult. He had expectations that were very specific and very fixed, and she was someone who could not be fixed. She paused. I didn't understand that when I was 9. I understood that she left. That was the whole of it, for a long time. I said, and Thomas? Something shifted in her face. She said, Thomas died in 2003, an accident. He was 42. She looked at her hands. He spent most of his adult life angry at her. I spent mine trying to understand her. I'm not sure which of us was right. I went home that evening to the house where I had grown up, my mother's house, which was mine to deal with now. And I sat in the kitchen for 3 hours. I sat in the kitchen where the pound cake had been made every Christmas, and where the tin box still sat on the counter with the good scissors and the index card in handwriting I could not entirely read. I got up and I opened the tin box. I found the index card. The handwriting was hers, my mother's, from decades before, when her letters were rounder and more careful than they became later. The recipe was simple: butter, eggs, sugar, flour, a tablespoon of vanilla. No name at the top, no indication of whose grandmother this was or had been, just the recipe, in her careful young handwriting, on a card that had been handled so many times the corners were soft. I stood in the kitchen and I thought, she carried this from Savannah. Whatever else she left, she carried this. The following weeks were the weeks of estate administration, which is its own kind of grief. Practical, relentless, requiring decisions in the middle of mourning. I hired an estate attorney. I went through 40 years of accumulated belongings. I found things I expected to find and things I did not. I found a shoebox on the top shelf of her bedroom closet, behind her winter sweaters, that contained the following: 4 photographs, a letter still in its envelope, and a child's drawing on folded notebook paper. The photographs were old. 2 were of children, a girl and a younger boy, in clothing from the 1960s, standing in the yard in front of a house I did not recognize. In one of them, the girl was looking at the camera with my mother's eyes. In the other, the boy was squinting in summer light. The third photograph was of my mother, young, younger than I had ever seen her, standing in front of what appeared to be the same house. She was laughing at something outside the frame. I had seen photographs of my mother young, but not this young, not before Atlanta, and I held this photograph for a very long time. The fourth was of my mother and a man I had never seen, a wedding photograph, formal, black and white. She was looking at the camera with an expression I could not interpret, not happy, not unhappy, present, contained. The expression of a 19-year-old who is doing something that will define her and does not yet know how. The letter in the envelope was Margaret's. Return address, Savannah, Georgia. Postmark, 11 years ago. It had been opened and folded back along its original creases. I did not read it. I held it, and then I put it back in the envelope. The child's drawing was a house with a yellow sun. In the bottom right corner, in crayon, Mama. In a child's handwriting that could have been either of her first 2 children, either of the ones she left, neither of whom she ever mentioned to me in 43 years of being my mother. I called Margaret the next day. She answered on the second ring. I said, "I found a box." There was a silence. Then she said, "She kept a box." I said, 4 photographs, your letter, a drawing." The silence lasted long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Then Margaret said, "Thomas drew her pictures all the time. After she left, he would draw pictures of her and put them in an envelope. He wanted to mail them, but we didn't have an address. I still have them. He drew her pictures for years." I said, "This one says Mama." Margaret was quiet. Then she said, "She kept a box." I want to tell you what I have come to understand about my mother in the months since the funeral. Not the complete version. I am not sure the complete version is available to me, and I have made peace with that imperfectly. But the version I can reach. My mother was someone who could not be fixed, as Margaret said. She was restless and beautiful and funny, and she was also, at some level I will never have direct access to, someone who left. She chose a different life entirely. She built it from scratch with a new name in a new city, and she was my mother for 43 years. Present, consistent, calling every Sunday at 10, making the pound cake. She was also someone who received a letter from the daughter she had left and did not respond, and kept the letter in a shoebox on the top shelf of her closet for 11 years. She kept it. She did not throw it away. She did not respond, and she did not discard. I have thought about what that means for a long time. I think it means she was carrying it. Whatever she had done, whatever 16-year-old certainty had convinced her to marry, whatever 25-year-old desperation had convinced her to drive away and not come back, she had been carrying it since, in the way of people who do not know how to put things down and cannot figure out how to address them, and so just carry them. In a box, behind the winter sweaters, with the good scissors in the tin on the counter and the pound cake recipe in careful, young handwriting. Margaret and I have met twice since the funeral, once in Atlanta, once in Savannah, where she still lives. The second time, she took me to Forsyth Street. The house is different now, renovated several times, but the street is the same. We stood on the sidewalk and she said, "This is where she was before she was your mother." I said, "She was always my mother." Margaret looked at me. I said, I know she was yours first. I know Thomas had her first. I know what she took from both of you, and I'm not making that smaller. But she was my mother for 43 years, and nothing about that was false. She showed up. She was present. She loved me in the specific, consistent, pound cake and Sunday phone call way that is the actual texture of being loved. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know she did." She looked at the house. She said, "I just wanted to know she was okay. That's all I ever wanted. That she found something that worked for her, even if it wasn't us." I said, "She was okay. She was more than okay." Margaret nodded. She held that. We still talk, roughly once a month. She is 12 years older than me, and we have different memories, and neither of us knew the same person. She knew the woman before, I knew the woman after, and the woman herself is gone and cannot explain the distance between the two. We are left to piece it together from what we have: a box with 4 photographs, a letter, and a child's drawing of a house with a yellow sun. Some inheritances are not chosen. Some families are not the ones you are told you have. I made the pound cake at Christmas this year. Same index card, same careful young handwriting. My daughter stood next to me and measured the vanilla. I told her the recipe was her great-grandmother's. It is. I am just no longer certain which one. There is something I want to tell you about the drive home from Savannah. Margaret and I had lunch after Forsyth Street, a small restaurant she had been going to for years, the kind of place that has the same menu it has had for decades and where the servers know your order. She ordered without looking at the menu. I ordered the same thing she ordered, which I understood, as I did it, was a small act of claiming something. We talked for 2 hours. Not about my mother. We had talked about my mother enough for one visit. And there is a particular exhaustion that comes from examining a person who is no longer there to participate in their own examination. We talked about our lives. Margaret had been a high school history teacher for 30 years. She was recently retired. She had 2 adult sons and a marriage of 38 years to a man named George, who had driven her to Atlanta for the first meeting and waited in the car because he understood that some rooms need to be entered alone. I told her about my work. I am an architect. I design schools mostly, which struck Margaret as funny in a way that took her a moment to explain. Your mother taught in them, my mother taught in them, and you build them. The continuity was not something I had considered before she named it. I held it for the rest of the lunch. On the drive home, I passed through the section of I-75 where the land opens up and you can see the sky broadly in all directions, and the trees have not yet closed back in. It was late afternoon, and the light was the specific gold of Georgia October, and I drove through it and thought about my mother. I thought about what it costs to leave. Not the leaving itself, the ongoing cost, the decades of carrying, the shoebox on the top shelf, the letter read and folded and kept for 11 years without response. I had been angry at her in the weeks between the funeral and the Savannah trip. Not devastated. I had spent my devastation in the 4 months before she died, in the hospital chair, in the ordinary grief of losing a parent slowly. The anger came later, when Margaret's existence had time to settle into what it meant. The anger was specific. She could have told me. She had 43 years. She had Sunday mornings at 10 and 45 minutes each week, which is hundreds of hours, which is time enough to say, "There is something I need to tell you about who I was before." She did not say it. And then, somewhere on I-75 in the broad October light, the anger shifted. Not dissolved, shifted into something more complicated and, I think, more accurate. She was afraid. Not of me, or not only of me. Afraid of the version of herself she had built in Atlanta. Afraid that naming the woman who had driven away from Forsyth Street in 1967 would somehow contaminate the woman who had been my mother for 43 years. Afraid that if she said the words, the two versions of herself would have to exist in the same room, and she did not know what would happen if they did. I understand that fear. I am an architect. I know what happens when a structural decision made at the beginning of a project is never revisited. The whole building is organized around it. You cannot simply remove it later without understanding exactly what it is holding up. She had built everything on the foundation of leaving, and she had not known, or had not been able to discover, what would remain standing if she named it. My daughter is 22. Her name is Claire. She has my mother's eyes, the dark brown that goes several shades darker in certain lights, and she does not know she has them from someone who was in a second row at a funeral. She knows she has them from me, which is true as far as it goes. I have been thinking about whether to tell her. Not whether she deserves to know, she does, but about timing, about readiness, about the particular architecture of family truths and when they can be added to the structure without destabilizing it. I will tell her. I have decided that. I will tell her because the alternative is the shoebox on the top shelf, and I have seen where that ends, and I am not willing to be the person who keeps the box. I will tell her about Margaret, and about Forsyth Street, and about the pound cake recipe in the careful young handwriting. I will tell her that her grandmother was a woman who left one life and built another, and was present in the second one in all the ways that mattered for daily living, and absent from it in the specific, costly way of someone who cannot bring herself to speak a truth that changes the shape of everything. I will tell her because she is 22, and she should know who she comes from, all of who she comes from, including the parts that are complicated, including the woman on Forsyth Street who got into a car in 1967, and the child's drawing that said Mama, and the box that was kept for 43 years behind the winter sweaters. The pound cake is part of it. The Sunday calls are part of it. The letter read and not answered is part of it. All of it is my mother. All of it is Claire's grandmother. All of it is the inheritance, complete and complicated, that belongs to both of us now. I drove home through the October light and I thought, she showed me the box. Not literally, she never showed me anything, but she kept it. For 43 years, she kept it where I would find it, behind the winter sweaters, which is not a deep hiding place in a house you know completely. It is the kind of hiding place a person chooses when they need to keep something close and cannot bring themselves to surface it. She kept the box where I would find it. I think that was the most honest thing she ever said to me. Margaret sent me a photograph last month. She found it in her own boxes, not a shoebox, a proper archive she has been maintaining for years, the historian's instinct. It is of my mother at approximately 15 or 16, before the marriage, before Forsyth Street, before anything. She is standing in front of a car in summer light, and she is looking at the camera with an expression I have been trying to name for weeks. I think it is hope. The particular hope of someone who has not yet made the decisions that will define them, who is still, at 15 or 16, entirely open. She was open once. Then she made some choices, and she lived with them for 52 years. And some of what she built was beautiful, and some of it was a shoebox on a shelf, and all of it was her. And she was my mother, and I loved her, and I am still loving her, in the complicated way you love someone once you know everything about them. That is what I am left with. Not the anger, which moved through and kept moving. Not the shock of the second row at the funeral, which is now just a fact, another piece of the architecture. What I am left with is love. The specific, revised, fully informed love of a daughter who knows now who her mother was before she was her mother. It is, I have discovered, still love. Nothing about it is simple, but it is still love. There is one more thing I want to tell you, something small that has stayed with me. On the day I cleaned out my mother's house, the final day, the day I handed the keys to the real estate agent, I went through every room one last time. Not looking for anything, just walking through the space where she had lived for 40 years, letting the rooms be rooms, letting the house be the house before it became someone else's house. I went into the kitchen last. The tin box was still on the counter. I had taken the index card, the pound cake recipe, out weeks earlier when I was going through her papers, and I had kept it. The tin box itself was empty now. I picked it up. I turned it over in my hands. It was just a tin, the kind that might have held cookies once, painted with a pattern of blue flowers that had mostly faded. She had kept her scissors in it and her important small things for as long as I could remember. I put it in the box of things I was keeping. Then I stood in the kitchen and I said goodbye to her. Out loud, quietly, in the empty house. I said thank you for the Sunday calls and the pound cake and the specific way she had of sitting across from me at this kitchen table and listening without interrupting, and then saying the one thing that reframed everything I had just said. I said, I know now. I know the whole of you, and I am not going anywhere. The house was empty, and she was not there, and the October light came through the kitchen window at the angle it always had. I stood in it for a moment. Then I picked up my box, and I walked out, and I closed the door. The tin box is on my kitchen counter now. I keep the pound cake recipe in it, and the photograph Margaret sent, my mother at 15 or 16, standing in front of a car, looking at the camera with hope. And next to the photograph, folded carefully, the child's drawing from the shoebox, the house with the yellow sun, the word Mama in crayon in a child's hand. All of it together, the before and the after, the first life and the second life, and the daughter who came from the second life and knows about the first. This is the inheritance now. Complete. Subscribe because every story on this channel is real, it is raw, and it is worth your time. Drop a comment below, where in the world are you watching from? And if you have ever had to hold the whole complicated truth of someone you loved, I read every single one.